from the barber shops to the beauty shops to any other shop, that they were socially engineering the American people with the O.J. Simpson trial. But this trial that's going on out there, for some reason, there seems to be a complete, again, media blackout regarding Michael Jackson and AEG, and it is a $40 billion lawsuit that Mama Catherine Jackson and the Jackson family, of course, has introduced against AEG Live and Philip Anschwartz and all of those that were, again, privy to Michael Jackson, had access to Michael Jackson, and may have benefited from the death of Michael Jackson. And, of course, never to forget, as Dick Gregory shared with us, the enormous amount of oil that was discovered under Neverland, which was Michael Jackson's home as well. And you have a company called Colony Capital that's been trying to get control over Michael Jackson's estate there at Neverland. But I promise you, between now and Saturday, I will go deep into that and share much of that information with you, because most of what many of you think you know, you really don't know. And as I said before, our news media, black news media, has been taken over. So most of the black news media will not talk about this case and dare to even have an interview with Catherine Jackson. We've had to hear her on the British takeover, according to the New York Times just yesterday, the British takeover of American newspaper and news outlets right now from Piers Morgan and others. And so they clearly have an agenda, the Rupert Murdoch, Greenbergs, and others that are taking over the American news media right now. So the American people, black, brown, red, yellow, and white, are being dumbed down when history is being changed and being reversed on this country right now when we look at what is going on. And speaking of what is going on, let me get into a little of this Supreme Court decision, which has come down yesterday around affirmative action, and the Supreme Court decision that was ruled upon today. As I've been warning you, as the American people, but particularly I'm speaking now to us as black folk, that we've been caught up in the fractions and the factions and the distractions and not keeping our eyes on the prize, as we would say in many of our civil rights songs and peace activist songs and human rights songs, that we've taken our eyes off the prize, and our leadership, which has become misleadership and bleedership, have taken their eyes off the prize. So while you were sleeping, they've been creeping slowly on the rights of the American people and slowly creeping in on the rights that we as blacks fought for to make life better for us as a people, but to make life for everyone else in this country better. Black, brown, red, yellow, white, men, women, children, the blind, the handicapped, the disabled, the hearing impaired, and all others got their rights off the backs of those of us who fought in the civil rights movement to make life better in this country. And now, after being the most loyal constituent of the Democratic Party, they're now turning back the hands of time on our gains in this country. And you need to look no further than what is happening in cities across America, but in particular in the Supreme Court yesterday, which of course voted 7-1 around the issue of, again, affirmative action, and sending that case back to the state of Texas. But did you know, as I will share with you, as I've been sharing with you about the showdown that's about to go down, of course, in this country right now between blacks and, let me just go ahead and get it out the way, members of certain segments and population of the white community, but certain segments and members of the Jewish community who said that our struggle and their struggle have been one and the same. But if I told you that as we speak right now, that the Supreme Court decision or the Supreme Court case, Fisher versus Texas, of course, Fisher was a little Jewish girl, white Jewish girl, if I can keep it real. But the man who brought the case, name is Edward Blum. You should Google his name and look him up. He is a stockbroker who used to work for Payne Weber. But Edward Blum is the man who, if I told you what would be the chances of not one case bought by the same man being heard by the same Supreme Court in 1 year, but what's the chances of two cases being brought by the same man by the name of Edward Blum being heard by the Supreme Court? I mean, you got lawyers and plaintiffs that have brought cases to the Supreme Court they're lucky if they hear one case in their lifetime brought before the Supreme Court. But here's a man that brought 2 cases before the Supreme Court in 1 year of the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court hears at least 800, if not 8,000 cases a year. But here's a man by the name of Edward Blum, who's tied heavily to the American Enterprise Institute. Also, he set up the Project for Fair Representation back in 2005 and set up the Donor Trust Fund. And this is clearly a slush fund or a hush fund that large businesses and corporations and organizations have contributed to for him to push this issue of, again, trying to reverse our gains around affirmative action. And now today, as we speak, the Supreme Court has voted 5-4 to basically gut and cut the Voters' Rights Act of 1965 that many and plenty fought for and died for, the right for us to be able to have the right to vote. So again, as I said before, while you're being distracted about and have been distracted about what's been going on in the court in Florida on the basketball court, you have those that have been working to turn back the clock, turn back the hands of time on our gains in, of course, the arena of civil rights and human rights as well. So again, Edward Blum, B-L-U-M, is the name you want to look up. Time right now won't give me an opportunity, but I promise you tomorrow I'll get into it. I'll go deep into it and share with you several articles talking about Edward Blum from the New York Times and other mainstream newspapers that have talked about this guy, Edward Blum. And every time they show the video footage of Miss Fisher, they show Edward Blum walking side by side with her. So this is cold, calculated, manipulated. And then you would have certain segments of the white community or the Jewish community say their struggle and ours have been one and the same, when we don't see that. And so that's a mind-blowing decision that's going to lead to some head-on collisions right now, when you would say, how could Edward Blum, who claimed to be somebody who was concerned about, again, human rights, and then work to go before the Supreme Court? So the question we're going to have to do, and when this should have been a freedom of summer in terms of for our young people and people of goodwill. See, as the old saying goes, the only thing necessary for evil to prosper is when good men and women do nothing and say nothing. So if you don't see so-called whites who are supposed to be of goodwill doing anything to say to Edward Blum, cease and desist around the issue of affirmative action and reversing affirmative action, cease and desist around reversing and turning back the clock on our Voting Rights Act, Section 4 and Section 5, then perhaps their silence is betrayal, or perhaps they're in cahoots with those who perhaps are working with Mr. Blum. And then we'll have to do the research to share with you and show you that perhaps Mr. Blum donated to a charity, or donated to a fund, or donated to something tied to members on that Supreme Court so that he could get 2 cases before the Supreme Court. He got statistics better than LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Tim Duncan, or anybody else that's ever played in the NBA. The chances of one white man getting 2 cases before the Supreme Court in 1 year, which is not something you see in a lifetime, but much less 1 year. So when you hear all this news media talking about the cases, notice they never mention the name Edward Blum. They never mention who are the plaintiffs, who bought the plaintiffs, and then financed the plaintiffs to bring those cases before the Supreme Court. Edward Blum, B-L-U-M. So you got to open your eyes up and see what's going on. And, of course, we'll get into the Trayvon Martin, because you see the court has already stacked the deck. They've, of course, had 3 judges now. And let me go ahead and throw this one. Let me go ahead and throw this one in there. Might as well throw this in there, as I've been talking about George Zimmerman in the trial. But to see that the judge has already struck out much of the significant evidence that the 911 calls will not be admissible at the trial. There can be no reference to racial profiling. That language the judge says that you cannot use to the attorneys. So that you clearly see the judge is stacking the evidence against the prosecutors. So they can't use the word racial profiling. They can only say profiling. You say, well, if it ain't, what other kind of profiling is it other than racial profiling? Is it animal profiling? What other kind of profiling is there if it's not racial profiling? But this is the judge, man. And, of course, let me go ahead and put her name out there. Deborah Nelson, Deborah Steinberg Nelson. If I can just give you the facts, man. Most of your news media keep saying Deborah S. Nelson. Deborah Steinberg Nelson is her name. She kind of looks like Miss Doubtfire a little. But, of course, she replaced Judge Kenneth Lester at the request of Mark O'Mara. We'll have to eventually give you a little more information on this attorney, Mark O'Mara, who was the one that had the, high-profile Casey Anthony case there in Florida. But again, as I've said, man, while you are sleeping, they're creeping. And I don't mean sleeping physically, but while you've been, again, caught up in the distractions and the factions and the fractions, spending all your time tweeting and Facebooking and using social media, talking about a basketball game. Somebody is turning back the clock on our games, man. Somebody's working to turn back our games. And, of course, in this Trayvon Martin case, the judges said there can be no, she barred expert testimony on, again, this whole issue, man, about George Zimmerman. So as I said before, and as I talked about before this started, that I'm clear that George Zimmerman will not see one day in jail, man. He will not see one day in jail around this issue, again, of the death of Trayvon Martin. So, again, you're tuned to the State of the City. Let me bring it on home, man, before I open up the lines. Talk about, again, the shootings and the killings that's been going on in the city of Baltimore at a time when your mayor, at a time when what's the Downtown Partnership and Kirby Fowler have been running around here saying that crime is down 525%. They will be talking about this long, hot summer, but in the words of Dr. King, you've had the long, cold winter. In order to plan, to strategize, to organize, to work with community groups and community associations, but to have a summit about crime at the beginning of the summer after we've had 20 shootings is kind of like too much, too little, too late. But your mayor was out of town in Las Vegas. Nobody has yet to tell me where was your police commissioner, man. You're cross country flying, and when he was the police chief in Oakland, we know he had a history of missing in action. He was MIA on Fridays. He was Mr. TGIF. Thank God it's Friday, and he was out of town. But again, this goes back to what we talked about last week with Councilman Carl Stokes regarding deployment of police officers. You can't tell me that the police can protect 30 to 40 to 50,000 people that go in and out of Camden Yards, probably with that exception of a couple of weeks ago at that Yankee game. They got a Yankee game coming up this week. Now let's see if there's any violence at that Yankee game. But you can't tell me that the police, our police, which they're using to protect all those fans going to the baseball game, all those fans going to the football game, can't protect citizens in the city of Baltimore. So this goes back to the issue of deployment. This goes back to the issue of strategy. And all of this should have been organized and strategized, of course, in the winter and in the spring, rather than wait till the summer to attempt to do so. But let me go to this clip of your mayor talking about the violence in the city of Baltimore. But this is from Sun Paper yesterday. 8 killed in bloody weekend, man. And I won't call out the names today, but I will take a day this week and we'll announce the names of those that have been killed thus far. And if the city council really cared, I mean all the members, they would go back and do what Lawrence Bell used to do when he's the city council president before every city council meeting. Every city council meeting starting on that Monday. They would have a roll call. They would have not just a moment of silence, but call out the names of the victims who have lost their lives so that you can humanize them in death as perhaps you didn't humanize them in life. And then begin to look at how you can up the reward when you have these kind of shootings and killings that are going on in the city of Baltimore. But again, at least 18 to 20 people were shot. And in one incident, there were 5 people shot there off the 700 block of Kenwood Avenue. And as interesting as I've been sharing with you, if you go up and down Monument Street, Johns Hopkins will have their security, along with Baltimore City Police, sitting in those nice, comfortable, air-conditioned booths. But they're there to be eyes and ears, man, to protect Hopkins employees and the general public, starting from Monument and Caroline all the way up to Monument to, I believe it's Patterson or Chester right there. Now, if they could do that there, couldn't they put those booths from Chester all the way up till you get to whatever streets you want to, Potomac, whatever streets you want to use, man. But an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But they clearly are showing that certain zip codes and certain lives have more value than other lives. Then you send and work with the groups like Operation Safe